Welcome to Revenge Fire. My name is Elena Marsh. I'm 32 years old, and 6 weeks ago, my mother stood up at a microphone in front of 200 people and told every single one of them that I was the reason her company almost failed. I wasn't just in the room, I was at the table she had personally assigned me to right up front, third seat from the left, close enough that I could see her lipstick when she smiled. It was the 40th anniversary gala for Marsh Property Solutions, the commercial real estate company my grandfather built from one strip mall in Dayton, Ohio, into a regional portfolio worth north of $60 million. The kind of event where you wear heels that hurt, drink wine you can't pronounce, and pretend everything is fine, because 200 investors, clients, and city officials are watching. My mother had planned every detail herself. The floral arrangements, the slideshow, the catering. She'd even printed a little program with a company timeline on the back. My name did not appear in the timeline. I noticed, when I flipped it over at my seat. My brother's name was there. My aunt's name was there. My grandfather's name was there, even though he'd been gone for 4 years. My name, despite the fact that I had spent 3 years redesigning the company's financial audit system and personally caught a vendor fraud that saved them nearly $400,000, was not there. I told myself it was an oversight. I was good at telling myself things like that. Then my mother picked up the microphone. She started with the history, the early years, the sacrifices, the growth. The room was warm and attentive. She talked about my grandfather with the kind of reverence she never showed him when he was alive, and people dabbed their eyes. Then she talked about the next generation taking the reins. She looked at my brother and smiled. She looked at my aunt and nodded. She looked at me, and her smile stayed exactly the same, which is to say, it didn't change at all, the way your face doesn't change when you look at a chair. Then she said it. There were some detours along the way. Some costly ones. She tilted her head just slightly in my direction, bringing in outside thinking when you don't fully understand a family business can create more problems than it solves. We learned that the hard way. The good news is that we course-corrected. And everything you see tonight reflects what this company looks like when it's led by the right people. A few people nodded seriously. A few looked at their programs. 2 people at the investor table glanced at me, then quickly looked away. My aunt, seated at the head table, picked up her wine glass and drank. I sat completely still. I had my phone face down on the table, but before my mother had even started speaking, some reflex, some old, quiet piece of me that had been waiting for exactly this had reached over and pressed record on the voice memo app. 7 years working in forensic accounting does something to you. You start treating everything like it might become evidence. I didn't cry. I didn't push back my chair or make a scene. I picked up my own wine glass and I took a slow sip, and I looked at my mother the entire time. She had moved on to thanking the catering staff before she looked back in my direction, and by then I had already decided something. I was done being the detour in someone else's story. Tell me something before I go further. Has someone in your family ever publicly reframed your contribution as a liability, smiled while doing it? In front of people who respect them, and you just sat there because you didn't know yet what you were going to do? I want to know if you kept quiet, or if you found another way. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, because what I did next is the part that changed everything. I drove home that night on autopilot, muscle memory carrying me back to the house I was renting, a 2-bedroom in Kettering. I'd moved into 8 months earlier, when I'd finally stopped making excuses for the apartment I'd been letting above my mother's garage. I know what you're thinking. A 32-year-old forensic accountant with a professional certification and a client list, still in her mother's orbit. I've asked myself the same question. The honest answer is that I stayed because I thought proximity meant I could fix things. That if I was close enough, helpful enough, useful enough, the relationship would eventually reflect the effort I was putting in. I had the same voice memo playing through my car speakers the whole way home. My mother's voice, costly detours, outside thinking. The careful implication that my presence had been a problem and my removal had been a solution, delivered with the composure of someone who had practiced it. When I got inside, I sat at my kitchen table without turning on the lights, and I played it twice more. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my grandfather's attorney. His name was Richard Hollis. He'd been handling the Marsh family estate since before I was born, and when my grandfather died 4 years ago, He'd been quietly, professionally present for every conversation that followed. I had his cell number because 6 months earlier, he'd called me out of the blue to ask if I'd ever reviewed the final version of my grandfather's will. I'd said I assumed it was what my mother had told us it was. He'd said, very carefully, that I might want to take a look at the original document. Then he'd said he wasn't able to say more than that without a formal inquiry, and we'd left it there. I had not followed up. Tonight, I was following up. He answered on the third ring. I apologized for the hour. He said, "Don't worry about it." I told him I'd been thinking about what he'd said 6 months ago. And I wanted to ask him directly, was the will my mother showed us the same document my grandfather actually signed? There was a pause. Not a surprised pause. The kind of pause a man makes when he's been waiting 4 years for someone to ask the right question. "I think," he said carefully, "that you and I need to sit down. Soon. Bring your brother if you can." The second call was to my brother. My brother worked in urban planning for the city of Columbus and had spent 4 years telling himself the same kinds of stories I had. He'd accepted his role at the company as being smaller than mine, accepted that our aunt had more authority than either of us, accepted that our mother ran the estate and the business as a single consolidated thing that didn't require input from her children. He was kind and conflict-averse, and he still brought our mother flowers on her birthday, even after she'd stopped inviting him to quarterly board reviews. When I told him what she'd said at the gala, he was quiet for a long time. "In front of everyone?" he asked. "Into a microphone," I said. Another silence. "What are you going to do?" "I'm a forensic accountant. I find money that people have tried to hide. I trace transactions that were designed not to be traceable. I build timelines from receipts and routing numbers and metadata on PDF files. That's what I do for every client who walks into my office." "I'm going to do my job," I said. The next morning, I called in a personal day, my first in 11 months, and drove to Richard Hollis's office in downtown Dayton. My brother drove up from Columbus and met me there at 11. Richard's office was the kind that hadn't changed in 30 years. Wood paneling, framed photos of fly fishing trips, a clock that ticked too loudly. He shook our hands, closed the door, and set a manila folder on the desk between us. "Your grandfather came to me privately, 6 months before he died," he said. He was worried. He'd seen some things in the company financials that didn't sit right with him. Changes to the ownership structure. Transfers he didn't remember authorizing. He revised his will at that point. And the document he signed, the one I witnessed and notarized, was different in several significant ways from the version your mother presented to you at the estate reading. My brother leaned forward. "Different how?" "The original will split the estate, including the company, into equal thirds between your mother, yourself, and Elena." He looked at me. "Your mother received 1/3, as did each of you. There was also a specific provision requiring a formal independent audit of the company financials before any transfer of assets." I stared at him. "That's not what she read to us." "No," he said simply. "It isn't." My brother looked like someone had just rearranged all the furniture in a room he'd been living in for years. "She showed us a copy. She said it was the finalized document." "It may have appeared to be," Richard said. "But the document she presented did not match the version your grandfather signed in this office. I kept a certified copy in my own files, which is standard practice. And your grandfather, to his credit, kept another copy with a private letter addressed to both of you to be delivered if you ever specifically requested the original." He slid the folder toward us. Inside was a photocopy of a will, neatly typed, with my grandfather's signature at the bottom. Beside it was a sealed envelope with both our names on the front in his handwriting. My brother opened the letter. I watched his face while he read it. He looked up when he was done, eyes red. He knew. "He suspected," Richard said. "He didn't have proof. He hoped he was wrong." I picked up the letter and read it myself. My grandfather's voice came through in every sentence, careful and measured the way he always was, but underneath it there was something exhausted. He wrote that he loved his daughter, but that he had watched her treat people's loyalty as a resource to be used and discarded, and he was afraid of what she would do to the two of us once he was gone. He wrote that he was leaving us this record not to start a war, but to make sure we would at least know the truth if we ever went looking for it. He ended with one line I read 3 times. "You deserved better from all of us. I'm sorry I waited this long to say it. If you found out that someone you loved and lost had actually tried to protect you, but the person controlling the paperwork had buried it, would you feel relief? Or would you grieve all over again for the years that were lost in between? I want to know what you would do with that letter. I am a forensic accountant. I want to be clear about what that means, because what I did next was not impulsive, and it was not revenge for its own sake. I documented everything. I requested my grandfather's original probate records from the county courthouse. I submitted a formal inquiry to the Ohio Secretary of State's office regarding the registered ownership records for Marsh Property Solutions. I called 2 colleagues I trusted and asked them to do a preliminary review of the company's publicly available tax filings for the years following my grandfather's death. I did not access anything I wasn't legally entitled to see. I left my personal feelings in a separate folder and treated my own family like a client. What I found in the first 2 weeks made the gala speech look like the least of it. Somewhere between my grandfather's death and the most recent fiscal year, the company's ownership had been restructured. My mother held 60%. My aunt held 30%. A holding company I'd never heard of, registered to a P.O. box in Cincinnati, held the remaining 10. My brother and I held nothing. The restructuring had been filed while both of us were still listed as potential heirs in the active estate proceedings, meaning it had been done during a window when our claims should have legally paused any major asset movement. The audit my grandfather had specifically required, never conducted. I pulled every change order, every vendor contract, every amendment filed in the 4 years since his death. I built a spreadsheet that took up 6 sheets and color-coded every transaction that didn't have a matching authorization on record. There were 41 of them, 41 transactions, totaling just over $2 million, that had moved from company operating accounts into the holding company in Cincinnati with no corresponding board approval, no documented business purpose, and no paper trail beyond the transfer records themselves. My brother came up on a Thursday evening and sat at my kitchen table while I walked him through it. He didn't say much. He asked 1 or 2 questions. At the end, he put his hands flat on the table and looked at the ceiling. She had a speech prepared, he finally said, about how much she sacrificed at the gala. I know. I was there. She's been doing this for 4 years. Probably longer, I said. I just started looking 4 years back. He asked me what the plan was. I told him. He nodded once. I'm in, he said. Richard Hollis connected us with a probate litigation attorney named Carol Demers, who had the precise manner of someone who had seen every variation of family fraud and found none of it surprising. She reviewed everything we brought her and called us back within 48 hours. The will discrepancy alone is enough to file a challenge, she said. Add the restructuring timeline and the undocumented transfers, and you have a pattern. This isn't a mistake. This was designed. She explained our options carefully. We could file a civil suit to contest the estate distribution and seek an accounting of the company's assets since my grandfather's death. We could also, if the evidence supported it, report the financial irregularities to the Ohio Attorney General's office, which had a division that handled estate fraud and fiduciary abuse. If you go the second route, she said, this becomes more than a family dispute. It becomes an investigation. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the gala, the 200 people, the microphone, the precise, practiced way my mother had smiled while she did it. She's been doing this long enough that she's stopped being careful, I said. I think she forgot I was paying attention. We filed the probate challenge and submitted a formal complaint to the Attorney General's office on the same day. Carol was the one who signed everything. My name was on the complaint, but I was also identified as the forensic analyst who had compiled the evidentiary documentation. I had spent 11 years building a reputation for that work. I wasn't embarrassed to use it. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Or rather, nothing that I could see happened. I went to work. I audited hospital billing systems and reviewed contracts for a regional nonprofit. I drove past my mother's house on the way to the grocery store, and her car was in the driveway, and the lights were on inside, and everything looked exactly the same as it always had. Then my aunt called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail asking if we could get coffee and clear the air before things get complicated. Her voice was careful in a way that told me someone had warned her something was coming. My mother called the next day. She also left a voicemail. Hers was shorter. Elena, Call me. Whatever you think you know, you don't have the full picture. You never do. I saved both voicemails and forwarded them to Carol. The following Thursday, a compliance officer from the Attorney General's Estate Fraud Division left a message asking to schedule a preliminary interview. Carol called me immediately after. "They're moving," she said. "This is real now." I knew what that meant. I'd been through enough investigations from the professional side to understand the pace of them, the way they expanded outward from a central question until they'd touched every related account, every related entity, every related person. I knew my mother was about to find out exactly how much paper she'd left behind. That Saturday, my mother invited me to brunch. I know how that sounds, but I want you to understand something about people who have controlled their families for a long time. They don't stop trying to manage the situation just because the situation has grown beyond them. They just adjust the method. My mother had spent 32 years knowing exactly which angle to come from with me, what tone of voice got through my defenses, what framing made me feel like the conflict was my fault. She had a lifetime of practice, but she had never tried to manage me after I'd already filed a legal complaint. That was new territory for her. I went to brunch. I arrived 5 minutes early and chose a seat facing the door. She came in looking polished and composed, kissed my cheek, ordered a mimosa, and spent exactly 4 minutes on small talk before she set down her glass and looked at me the way she used to look at my homework when she was about to explain what I'd done wrong. "I know you've been talking to Richard Hollis," she said. "I have. And to a litigation attorney." "Yes." She folded her hands on the table. "Elena, I understand you were upset about the gala. What I said came out more harshly than I intended, and I'm willing to have that conversation. But what you're doing now is not about the gala. You're trying to blow up 40 years of your grandfather's work because your feelings were hurt." I looked at her for a moment. "I'm not doing this because my feelings were hurt," I said. "I'm doing this because you filed a restructured ownership document during active estate proceedings, transferred $2 million to a holding company with no board authorization, and presented a will to your own children that didn't match the document your father actually signed." Her composure didn't break. It just shifted. A small recalibration. "Those are serious accusations," she said quietly. "They're documented findings," I said. "I do this for a living." She looked at me then with an expression I had never seen from her before. Not anger, not condescension. Something older than both of those. "Your grandfather left me a mess," she said. "You have no idea how much debt this company was carrying when he died, how many relationships I had to manage, how many decisions I had to make alone in the middle of all of it. I kept this company alive." "You kept your portion of it alive," I said. "And my brother's portion. And mine." Silence. "I'm not trying to destroy what he built," I said. "I'm trying to make sure it's distributed the way he actually intended. And I'm trying to make sure the people who trusted him get what he meant for them to have." She picked up her mimosa and took a slow sip. "If you move forward with this," she said, "I will make sure every professional contact I have in this city knows you used your position to target your own family." I had expected this. I had expected it so specifically that I almost felt relieved when she finally said it. "You told 200 investors and city officials that I was a costly mistake," I said. "You said it into a microphone. I recorded it. So I think we're past the point where your professional opinion of me is the most dangerous thing in the room." She put down her glass. She looked at me with something that might have been respect if it had arrived about 30 years earlier. "You've changed," she said. "I found the letter Grandpa left," I said. "I think I just finally started listening to him. If someone who raised you sat across from you and threatened your career instead of apologizing, and you had already set everything in motion before they even opened their mouth, would you feel powerful, or would it still hurt? I want to know. Because here's what they don't tell you about doing the right thing. It doesn't stop being painful just because you're right." The investigation moved faster than I expected. The Attorney General's office subpoenaed the company's financial records within 30 days of our complaint. My aunt, apparently, had retained her own attorney by then and was cooperating separately. Carol told me that was common in cases like this, that when the structure started to come apart, the people who'd been given smaller pieces often had the most to gain from transparency. My mother hired a defense attorney. She did not call me again. The probate challenge proceeded alongside the investigation. Carol filed a motion to restore the estate distribution to the terms of my grandfather's original will and attached the certified copy Richard Hollis had kept for 4 years. The opposing counsel argued that the document my mother had presented was valid. The judge ordered a formal forensic document review. I didn't conduct it myself. That would have been a conflict of interest, and I knew it. But the forensic examiner the court appointed was someone I'd taken a continuing education seminar with 3 years before, and when she delivered her report, her findings matched everything I had expected. The document my mother had presented differed from the original in 2 key clauses, the one distributing assets to my brother and me, and the one requiring an independent audit before any restructuring. Those 2 clauses had been removed. My brother drove up again when we got the news. We sat at my kitchen table, the same way we had the night I walked him through the spreadsheets, except this time, neither of us had much to say for a while. "He knew," my brother said finally. It was the same thing he'd said reading the letter, but now it meant something different. Now it meant our grandfather had been right, and had tried, and had not been fast enough. "He knew," I said. My aunt settled first. She agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for a reduced civil penalty, and she returned her stake in the holding company and a significant portion of the unauthorized transfers. She gave a formal statement to investigators. She did not apologize to me directly, but she sent a handwritten card that said she was sorry she hadn't spoken sooner, and that she hoped I understood she had believed my mother when she said we had both agreed to the arrangement. I did not write back, but I kept the card. My mother fought longer. Her attorney filed several motions, challenged the document review methodology, argued that the estate had been administered in good faith. None of it held. The probate court restored the will to my grandfather's original terms. The Attorney General's office reached a settlement that included repayment of the improperly transferred funds, a formal administrative penalty, and a 5-year prohibition on holding fiduciary authority over estate assets in the state of Ohio. She did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that, because the stories where everything lands perfectly are usually not the true ones. She did not go to prison, and she still lives in the same house, and she still has the same friends, and at family functions, the ones that still happen, which are fewer now, she moves through a room the same way she always has. But the company is no longer hers alone. Under the restored will terms, my brother and I each hold our grandfather's intended stake. There is now an independent board with outside oversight. The audit that my grandfather required, the one that was stripped from his will, was finally conducted, 4 years late, by a firm I recommended but did not work for. The first meeting of the reconstituted board was a Tuesday morning in February. My brother and I sat on one side of the conference table. My mother and her attorney sat on the other. The outside board members sat at the ends. My mother looked at me across the table and said nothing. I looked back at her and thought about the gala. The program with my name left off. The microphone. The 200 people who had nodded seriously when she called me a costly detour. I thought about what my grandfather had written. "You deserved better from all of us." I thought about all the years I had believed that working harder, staying closer, being more useful, would eventually add up to something that looked like being valued. The decade I had spent inside that belief, renovating it every time it collapsed, repainting the walls of it and calling that hope. The board chair called the meeting to order. I opened my folder, uncapped my pen, and got to work. My brother calls more now. Not about the company, just to talk, the way siblings do when they've stopped pretending they don't need each other. His daughter started walking, and he sent me a video at 7 in the morning, no context, just her taking 4 unsteady steps across a kitchen floor with the look of someone who has just discovered that the world is bigger and more manageable than it seemed. I moved into a house in late spring, not a rental, mine, with a yard that gets morning light and a second bedroom that has a desk in it and nothing on the walls yet because I haven't decided what I want to look at every day. That's a new thing for me, taking the time to decide what I actually want, instead of arranging myself around what everyone else needs from me. Richard Hollis retired 2 months ago. He sent me a note that said he was glad he'd made that phone call. I wrote back and told him it was the most important call I'd gotten in years. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. If there was a version of this where I had let it go, accepted the speech as a one-time thing, not made the calls or built the spreadsheets or walked into that brunch with my hands already on the table. I think about the letter my grandfather wrote, the way he said he'd waited too long, the exhaustion underneath every careful sentence, the apology that came 4 years after he was gone because he hadn't found the right moment while he was still here. I think about all the moments I sat at a table and told myself it wasn't the right time. There is never a right time. There is only the time you have and what you choose to do inside it. My mother did not make me a costly detour. She tried to make me believe I was one. Those are completely different things, and it took me 32 years and a forensic spreadsheet to understand the distance between them. Blood put us in the same room. It didn't make us family. My grandfather understood that. He spent his last years trying to make sure we would too. I keep one thing from all of it. Not the settlement documents or the board resolutions or the certified copy of the original will. I keep the letter. The one he sealed in an envelope with both our names on it and left with a man he trusted, in an office with wood paneling and a clock that ticked too loud, just in case we ever went looking. I've read it, maybe 40 times. Every time I get to the last line, I stop there for a minute before I fold it back up. You deserved better from all of us. I'm sorry I waited this long to say it, so now I'll ask you. If you spent years being told, in ways large and small, that you were the problem and then you found out that the one person who saw you clearly had actually tried to protect you, and someone else had buried it, would you use what they left you? Would you open the folder, trace the numbers, walk into the room and say out loud what everyone had agreed to pretend wasn't true? And if you've ever been rewritten in someone else's version of the family story, made smaller, made into a footnote, made into a mistake, what would it look like to finally take the pen back?